I always believed no matter what went wrong in life, second chances were always right around the corner. I was so grateful for my do-overs, I decided I best help other people get theirs too. But while I was making something good out of life, someone out there was plotting something evil. People move to Portland, Oregon for all sorts of reasons. I moved here for the best reason of all.
My mother moved to Portland to start a family up here. My father had friends that lived in Portland, so my mother followed him.
She would talk about having a family and being married to one man and spending time with him and growing old. Family meant everything to her.
Unfortunately, when I was 5 years old, things did not work between my father and my mother, so they went their separate ways.
I was hurting so bad, but I wasn't the only one, and I decided to help myself by helping others.
My mom started working for a local nonprofit. I really looked up to my mother. I liked the positive stuff that she was doing with the community.
Slowly, I got back on my feet, and sure enough, my heart started healing too.
Me and my mother went to a church with my mother's close friend. My mother met a man, and his name is Grover, and they started dating, and every day he would bring her a different rose.
They had an instant attraction. The relationship just blossomed after that.
Grover and I got married and had 2 kids of our own. For the first time ever, my life felt complete. But just when I felt like nothing could stop me, something did.
July 30th, 1993, I remember as it was just yesterday. I got out of summer school at 10:30 in the morning. First thing I did was call my mother, let her know I was home, and she sounded real happy. But then I heard like some yelling in the background, and then she said, "Nikki, I gotta go," and hung up.
I remember sometime around 11 o'clock in the morning, I got a phone call that there had been a shooting at a nonprofit.
As we pulled up, there's a lot of people standing outside. Several uniformed cars are there. I approach the uniform officer. When I get there, we were told one woman had been shot and she had already gone to the hospital. The other woman was dead.
There were no more second chances for me. Someone made sure of that. And while I couldn't tell the police who to look for, they were hoping my coworker could.
The coworker described that 2 men came running in, both yelling, "This is a robbery." The description was a couple of black men, young, 6 foot, 190 to 210 pounds. They couldn't give us any information at all other than that vague description.
Crime scene investigators examined the scene. They dusted for prints, checking for blood splatter, checking for shell casings. There wasn't anything left at the scene that was helpful.
But when investigators started looking at things a little closer, it was almost like that crime scene started speaking for itself.
When I looked at it, I immediately dismissed this was a robbery. Mrs. Clegg had been shot 5 times, but what really cinched it for me was she was shot 3 times in the back while she was laying on the floor. If this was a robbery, there would have been absolutely no reason to do that. Their intent was to kill her.
My dad came to me and he said, "Something tragic happened." I said, "What do you mean? What?" And my dad said, "Your mother is dead." He said, "She's dead, Michelle." I remember my mom's brother-in-law, Randall, was outside with Grover, and it was a lot of other people sitting on the couch and in the living room walking around and crying.
Delivering that kind of news to our sweet girl must have been awful hard. But things for my husband Grover were about to get a whole lot harder.
I was a little surprised that her husband didn't show up at the scene. That usually happens, but he didn't. We went looking for him, and we found him outside his mother's home. I approached, gave him my condolences, and it was odd. He was standing there, and he was squinting his eyes like he was trying to produce tears. You can't predict how someone's going to react, but I've never seen anybody that reacted like he did.
Grover fancied himself a pillar of strength. Tears and sadness didn't exactly fit in his comfort zone. But maybe that tough exterior masked something darker than I ever imagined. Children make you realize your supply of love is endless. And I made sure my children always knew they came first.
When I was in 5th grade, she let me have this great birthday party. We had cake, we played music, we were just dancing and having fun.
I had so much to celebrate in my life. I knew I had it good. But I learned long ago that you can't know good unless you know evil too.
It became very apparent very quickly that the homicide of Tina Clegg wasn't a robbery gone bad. It just seemed so planned.
What really cinched it was she was shot 3 times in the back while she was laying on the floor. Their intent was to kill her.
While investigators had no idea who shot me, they did know who to talk to first.
We always want to contact the spouse first, because even if they're not involved, they know more about the victim than anybody else in the world. In this case, the spouse was Grover Clegg.
My marriage to Grover was far from perfect. And sure, we had some problems from time to time. But what couple with 3 kids doesn't?
Well, we talked to him about their relationship. He said that they just had some minor problems, that it wasn't a big deal. He wanted to make it clear he didn't have any idea who killed Tina. And he had a solid alibi. He was playing golf that day with a friend, and we talked to the friend, and he verified that.
We knew Grover Clegg was not the shooter.
I didn't think that my stepfather had anything to deal with her murder. I'd never suspected that at all, you know, because they were happy. They had arguments here and there, but he loved her.
Grover could do some pretty stupid things, but I never thought murder would be one of them. Someone wanted me dead, though, and investigators were determined to find out who.
When we initially looked into her background, we didn't find anything. She didn't have any kind of a high-risk lifestyle, that she wasn't into drugs. Lots of friends that seemed to be upstanding people. There was no hint someone would want to kill her. At this point in the investigation, some officers had continued to talk to people. Witnesses outside the building saw a couple of young black men drive up in a maroon Oldsmobile. Then they heard the shots. Then these young men come running out and drove away in the car. The next day, we got a phone call that a car had been recovered that matched the description of the vehicle. The car was obviously stolen. The ignition had been punched out.
My killers hadn't left anything behind at the crime scene, but detectives were hoping this car would be different.
We searched the car, didn't find anything. Also checked for fingerprints and didn't find anything.
The shooters could have been anybody, because at this point we had no idea who'd done this terrible act.
With my killers still running free, laying me to rest didn't bring my family much peace at all.
It was a big shock. As a young girl, 14 years old, it was really, really hard. With my mother being gone, I didn't want to be there.
This was a horribly frustrating case. We're hoping for some kind of a break, for something to happen, that we can move forward with it.
I worked with lots of people who didn't have much in life, but they held on, believing something better might be coming around the corner. I guess investigators have to live like that too.
It was about 3 months before we got our first break. We got a call that a man had been arrested for a car theft. His name was Richard Stewart, and Richard wanted to talk to us about the homicide. He said someone told him that he had killed a woman at a nonprofit. This was huge. This was the first solid break that we had really gotten.
This guy was talking a big game about my death. But everyone knows, talk is cheap. Except maybe when it comes to murder. We all need someone in life to be our champion. I was my daughter's champion. But now that I was gone, that poor girl didn't know what to do.
Her mother had just been killed. She was young. And all I know is I wanted to be there for her to take away the pain.
Jan became a second mother to me after the situation, knowing she was really close to my mother. So it was like we were there for each other.
As long as my killers walked free, it was impossible for my loved ones to heal. But maybe that was all about to change.
Our first big break came 3 months after the murder, where a man by the name of Richard Stewart was arrested on an unrelated charge and said he had information on the Tina Clegg killing.
He said he knows who killed Tina Clegg. He said it was a man named Larry Matthews, but that was all he had.
We found out a little bit more about Larry Matthews, that he was kind of an up-and-coming gang member, kind of a tough kid.
We checked, couldn't find any direct connection between Larry Matthews and Tina Clegg at all.
None of this made any sense to me, so you can be sure it didn't make sense to investigators either.
I called Larry, asked him to come down to Detective Division and talk to me, and he did. He denied any knowledge of it, said he had no idea what I was talking about, didn't have any idea why Richard Stewart would say that he did it. I just had to let him go. There was nothing.
Larry wasn't giving the cops anything. But the more this other guy, Richard Stewart, talked, the more he revealed.
As we went along, Stewart gave me just a little bit more information, and it hit me, he's got to be involved. You know, he can't have that much information just from somebody telling him this. So my partner and I brought him back to the office, and I asked him to take a polygraph. He agreed, and he flunked part of the polygraph. He knew more than he was telling us. We sat down with Richard Stewart and said, look, we know you lied. Now we're trying to figure out what you lied about. I said, you have to tell us everything you know. And he said, well, okay, I lied.
Looked like this guy Richard had finally decided to start telling the truth. But what came out of his mouth next was nothing anyone expected.
He told us that he and Larry had been hired to kill Tina. And he told us that they were going to be paid $1,000 apiece. Then he blurted out that they had been hired by Tina's brother-in-law, Randall Clegg.
When you get married, you better believe you'll run into some drama with your in-laws. But there's a huge difference between a family feud and murder.
This is the first time we had heard Randall Clegg's name being used as part of the crime.
What's shocking about that is that Randall Clegg was a person who had virtually no criminal record.
Randall was never the sharpest tool in the shed. Everyone knew that. So no one believed he had planned my murder on his own.
Richard then told us that Randall had said that his brother Grover, Tina's husband, was going to pay them the money to kill Tina.
Like all brothers, Grover and Randall shared plenty of secrets. But it looks like their biggest secret of all was far more sinister than anyone could imagine. There's a fine line between love and hate. You just never know how thin it is until someone walks right over it.
Approximately 3 months after the murder, we got a call that a man had been arrested for a car theft. His name was Richard Stewart. He told us that he and a man named Larry Matthews had been hired to kill Tina Clegg.
Richard Stewart said that Randall and Grover Clegg had hired him to do the killing.
I loved my husband Grover, and his younger brother Randall was like my own. I thought we were a family, but now investigators were out to prove they were my killers.
Stewart's statements by themselves would not be enough to convict or probably even charge Randall and Grover Clegg. We had to go out and get more evidence.
We didn't go interview Randall or Grover right away because we didn't want him to know he was in the spotlight. The only person we could arrest at that time was Richard. And as soon as we arrested Richard, I was in the process of trying to set up a polygraph with Larry. And I got a call that Larry Matthews had been shot and killed in a drug deal that had gone bad.
Fortunately for investigators, Larry Matthews didn't take all of his secrets to the grave.
Even though Larry Matthews was dead, we were going to run down leads that still implicated him. And one of those leads was his ex-girlfriend. When we questioned his ex-girlfriend, she gave us a very powerful story about how Larry Matthews, day before the homicide, came home and said somebody had offered him $1,000 to kill the person's wife. This was so important because now we had another witness who gave support to the statements of Richard Stewart.
Sometimes when we want something so bad, we ignore any sign there might be something wrong with it. Turns out my marriage to Grover was no exception.
Police started getting tips from co-workers of Grover Clegg talking about how unhappy he had been in his marriage to Tina, but he didn't want to have to pay for a divorce. He didn't want to lose custody, and they had life insurance, and he wanted it.
We were finally able to gather enough circumstantial evidence that we could get an indictment against Grover and Randall Clegg.
Even after the arrests, Grover and his brother thought they could stay strong and silent. But by then, investigators had already figured out the truth.
When all was said and done, what happened was Grover Clegg wanted out of the marriage. He didn't want to pay child support. He just wanted her to go away. His younger brother, Randall, apparently knew people who would be willing to do it, so he solicited Randall to pay Larry Matthews and Richard Stewart to go kill his wife. On the day of the murder, Richard Stewart stole the vehicle, picked up Larry Matthews. They went to the office. They had decided that they would make it look like a robbery. They came in and murdered Tina Clegg. And then they fled. They drove the car about 6 or 7 blocks. They dumped it and left.
I felt betrayed. I felt hatred towards them. I thought he really loved my mother. You know, when you get married, the vows are through sickness, through health, till death do us apart. You know, I never thought he would have her killed.
Grover thought he could outsmart everybody. But my blood is on his hands, and it's a stain he'll never be able to wipe away.
The trial was emotional. I know the whole time I stared right at Grover, and he wouldn't look at me. It seemed like it was the longest couple of days of my life. I was praying for the death penalty. They didn't give her the chance to live, so why should they?
We all make mistakes in life. My biggest one ended up getting me killed. And while I'd do anything for a do-over, even now, I know loving Grover wasn't for nothing.
She loved her family, she loved her children, and none of that would have ever changed. And I think that if Tina had lived, she would to love life just like she did.
I think about her every day. But I know she's up there watching over us. I really know she's watching over us.
Life is about going out on limbs and taking chances. Some of them work out, and some clearly don't. But you never know until you try. And in the end, if you can say you tried your very best, I'd say that's a life well lived. I always believed no matter what went wrong in life, second chances were always right around the corner. I was so grateful for my do-overs, I decided I'd best help other people get theirs too. But while I was making something good out of life, someone out there was plotting something evil. People move to Portland, Oregon for all sorts of reasons. I moved here for the best reason of all.
My mother moved to Portland to start a family up here. My father had friends that lived in Portland, so my mother followed him.
She would talk about having a family and being married to one man and spending time with him and growing old. Family meant everything to her.
Unfortunately, when I was 5 years old, things did not work between my father and my mother, so they went their separate ways.
I was hurting so bad, but I wasn't the only one, and I decided to help myself by helping others.
My mom started working for a local nonprofit. I really looked up to my mother. I liked the positive stuff that she was doing with the community.
Slowly, I got back on my feet, and sure enough, my heart started healing too.
Me and my mother went to a church with my mother's close friend. My mother met a man, and his name is Grover, and they started dating, and every day he would bring her a different rose.
They had an instant attraction. The relationship just blossomed after that.
Grover and I got married and had 2 kids of our own. For the first time ever, my life felt complete. But just when I felt like nothing could stop me, something did.
July 30th, 1993, I remember as it was just yesterday. I got out of summer school at 10:30 in the morning. First thing I did was call my mother, let her know I was home, and she sounded real happy. But then I heard like some yelling in the background, and then she said, "Nikki, I gotta go," and hung up.
I remember sometime around 11 o'clock in the morning, I got a phone call that there had been a shooting at a nonprofit.
As we pulled up, there's a lot of people standing outside. Several uniformed cars are there. I approach the uniform officer when I get there. We were told one woman had been shot, and she had already gone to the hospital. The other woman was dead.